Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live presentation of SumerDaily. We're coming off an exhilarating rookie v. rookie matchup between Michael Penix Jr. and Jaden Daniels, the Washington Commanders, and the Atlanta Falcons. I'm joined here today by super producer Matt Stopsky. Matt, how you doing today?
Dude, the Giants won today. I'm a happy man. Like it's a great day.
And so keeping it in the NFC East, because we're gonna wait to talk Giants after we get to this game, but some pretty big implications from the Giants and some pretty big implications from an Eagles victory earlier in the day and from this Commanders victory today. The quarterbacks both kind of showed out.
Yeah,
Michael Penix, the ADOT was substantially up. The efficiency didn't necessarily follow. We talked about that a lot on the Sumer Sports Show with Lindsey Rhodes. You can go back and check that out. Last Tuesday, the Tuesday before, we've had a lot of Michael Penix talk there. But he turns clutch. Jaden Daniels is clutch. What was your kind of evaluation prior to the draft on these two quarterbacks, and how have they kind of lived up to it since then?
Dude, I thought Daniels was very close to Caleb. He was the only quarterback I had like in that top tier. And I actually had Penix really close to Drake May. I thought he was a tier below Jaden, but no, not bad at all. Like still like, Pro Bowl caliber player. And we're seeing these two kids like really battle it out, man. This was great for both Washington and Atlanta. Obviously the time management stuff with Washington with Atlanta, we're going to probably talk about down the line, but they should feel pretty good about their quarterback. This is they have a real one.
It's interesting because I think a lot of the rookie, notches in the armor showed up in this game. I think there was substantially less for Jaden Daniels. I think he showed out in a way that basically proved that he can kind of be an offense, at least when he's healthy. And Penix, there was a little bit more to work out, which is fair. This was really his first matchup against a playoff level opponent at this point in a key primetime game. He can just rip the ball, dude. I mean, the deep outs on the final drive, just absolute javelins. And obviously the touchdown also to Kyle Pitts, just an absolute beanball. He showed that at Washington, Stopsky, and I'm loving how it's showing up, particularly given he has these big body receivers like Kyle Pitts and Drake London, and then he has a deep threat in Darnell Mooney, who he was also able to hit on a pretty big throw down the stretch. But we got to talk about the time management. I think the offense is in a good spot. I think it's opened up for Zach Robinson, and I think Bijan's in a good spot to succeed as well in the running game. But both at halftime and at the end of the game, it seems like Raheem Morris left some points on the board just by not properly managing his timeouts.
Yeah, that last drive, I just don't understand why they didn't use it more to get closer. The backup kicker, Bates, not Bates. Who's the backup kicker? Patterson. Has been shaky. We saw that against the Giants as well. Like I don't know why you wouldn't try to get him as close as possible,
right?
And not using those timeouts properly, kind of put him in a bad spot. But still, like I can't. Atlanta's played very well this year, so I don't want to like kill Raheem Morris for this, but I'm sure it's something when he looks back on, he probably wishes he could have done a little differently.
Right. And I think that's why you got to add game management guys to your staff. I'm sure they probably do have one. I don't know if he's in his ear. I'm not exactly certain how it goes, but at Sumer Sports, we're always looking for places that you can add alpha. And when you're leaving anywhere from 14 to certainly 3 points on the board at the end of the half or at the end of the game, it's really a killer in these really, really tight games where really playoff potential hangs in the balance. And so now it looks like the Falcons are pretty squarely out. The Commanders are pretty squarely in. We learned a lot about these two teams. I think the first half was a little bit marred by penalties by the Commanders. I didn't love that. The second half, a little bit marred by the short kick, but I thought that the Commanders really controlled the ball. And the idea of the cliff, the idea that Cliff Kingsbury falls off in the second half of the season just seems to be a facade. He really was able to lock in the red zone all throughout the game, and we saw Jaden Daniels really succeed in that offense.
Yeah, man. This is something we talked about early in the year, like, when's it going to hit for Cliff? And we thought maybe there was a period like, here it comes. And this really hasn't happened yet. And I think that a lot to be said about how Cliff has adapted as an offensive coordinator in the NFL, and also Dan Quinn as a head coach, like keeping everything in check and everything balanced. This Washington team, man, is not like, I know they're going to go as a wild card. This is a dangerous Washington team. Like this, It would not surprise me if they made it to the divisional round, or even also made it to the conference championship. Like this is a good team that, listen, Philadelphia had that hell of a run, but at this point, if you'd ask me which team from the NFC East is more dangerous, like I would say Washington.
I don't know if Jalen Hurts plays. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but I think in a playoff situation, there's not really a level that you can account for as a defense, Jane Daniels, at this point, in my mind. I know I've always been really high on him. I know I will continue to be really high on him. But his ability to take over games with his legs and then deliver precise balls when they need to be precise in the clutch is second to none. And now he's done it for 17 games almost. And you don't really see that out of rookies generally. Even they were showing highlights of RG3 throughout the matchup. And RG3, I think, had a lot more help from the scheme to a certain degree. I think there's a lot on Jaden Daniels' plate here. But something that you also noted that I did want to highlight is he's getting pretty good production from his running backs. And I think that probably also goes to Cliff's plate and to his credit, because we're seeing guys like Jeremy McNichols contribute, like the Rodriguez cat they have back there, who's basically their fourth string, given that Eckler's out. And then Brian Robinson carried the game in the second half for quite a while. And so we talked about it many times, the way he mixes in gap scheme runs. We saw them run 2 quarterback sweeps in the red zone in that final drive. Cliff's really mixing it up. And I think when we're talking from a scheme perspective, I don't really know how you approach that given the talent that Jaden Daniels is once you get in the playoffs. Do you have any answers for it, Stopsky?
Oh, well, I'm not an NFL defensive coordinator, and a talent like Jaden who can make plays with his feet, that's always going to be a problem, right? And we always knew Cliff, was a very dynamic play caller, especially when it comes to the passing game. Listen, they're going to be hard to stop. They're going to be really hard to stop. And apparently Zach Ertz turned the clock back 10 years today. So like, listen, there's this team, when they're clicking, is really, really hard. For me, really where to take advantage of Washington's on the defense. I've been on the sideline for both the Washington games against New York, and the Giants, who have not had, besides today, have not had a great offense that were able to drive the ball against Washington. So that's what I think where you really do is you try to get them to be off balance and try to have it be the Jaden Daniels show. But if they're on script, it's hard to beat Washington.
It's very interesting because going into the year, we were worried about their talent more generally outside of Brian Robinson and the unknown of having a rookie quarterback. And the scripts have kind of flipped on the offense and defensive side of the ball. On the offensive side of the ball, there were different times in the game in which I was thinking to myself, okay, is Olamide Zaccheaus just going to be the best player on the field for the remainder of the game? And then, as you mentioned, down the stretch, it seems like Zach Ertz was just all of a sudden the best player on the field at the end of the game. And then you look on the defensive side of the ball as the Falcons are driving the ball down the field, and you're like, are these cornerbacks by far the worst players on the field? We have Jeremy Chin guarding Kyle Pitts, which I don't love.
No one does.
Look, I acknowledge Frankie Louvu and I love Bobby Wagner, but as the game goes on, those are two veteran true run stuff guys, and in Frankie Louvu's case, kind of more of a hybrid rush linebacker at times. They're not going to be able to keep up with Bijan Robinson in the third and fourth quarter in the passing game, much less Kyle Pitts. And it's really the flip side of the situation where you're like, these guys are actively the worst players on the field, and you're going to have to manage it around them. And I think when those players get upgraded to the AJ Browns of the world, the Amon-Ra St. Browns of the world, the Justin Jeffersons and Aaron Joneses of the world, I think that may look a lot different as they match up in the playoffs. What do you think?
Yeah, no, when they play explosive offenses, it's going to be hard. And we saw that right against Philadelphia last week, where when it was Jalen Hurts was in, they were dog walking Washington. It was when he went out and Kenny Pickett was in, and they could start stacking the box against Saquon a bit more. Then they were able to come back and kind of even it out. But I also want to give a shout out to Washington's offensive line. Like that was the biggest question going into the season for me.
Mm-hmm.
Was like, they had Sam Cosme, who I think is an underrated guard, and that was like really it. They had Tyler Bierdosh, Andrew Wiley. Like, are these guys really going to pull it together and become like a really good unit? And like this is it the best offensive line in football? Absolutely not. But like it's a solid line, and way better than I think many predicted to start the season. So really just kind of a shout out to Dan Quinn, like having all of his guys kind of like punching above their weight here, and getting a team that probably should have been, the year one of rebuild into the playoffs, which is just really impressive.
Certainly. That's a great shout out too, because in this game, Biotish went out, and I think Cornelius Lucas also went out for a period of time. And it looked like for a bit that this Falcons defense, which has been unable to get pressure on mostly anyone this year, was going to continually get pressure as a result of some of those injuries. And just like you said, they stepped up. All of a sudden, they're running the ball all over the place in the second half. I want to do kind of a retro on the Falcons before we move into some of the other implications of this weekend. If you're going into this offseason and you know that Michael Penix has played well to close the season, and you know that you're fairly confident in Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Darnell Mooney, Bijan Robinson, you're going to bring the gang back on offense. How do you really try to make a move in the draft, in the offseason, to crown yourself as the best in the NFC South, which certainly seems up for grabs for at least the next 3 to 4 years?
No, absolutely. That's a good question. Like, we got to see who's up for. I haven't had a chance to look at their free agents that are coming up for them. Do you know who's hitting free agency for Atlanta in terms of who they have to bring back? Because that's the first thing, right? You want to bring them. You right. Like this group. You gotta make sure the guys that are on this team aren't departing. So a couple of questions to you. So the guys that are in free agency next year, you got Matthew Judon, Justin Simmons, Lorenzo Carter. That's what it is. Those are most of their offense is coming back, which is pretty great. Yep. And then what's their cap situation like for next year? As I check as we are live, the Falcons. Let's see, what do you got? Falcons have, as of next year, the first $5 million.
Yeah. So the first thing they're gonna have to get around is the Kirk Cousins issue.
How do you do that?
Which there's no really way around it. But I'd much rather have to get around that issue with a full clip on offense, as they kind of do, versus not. Versus being in a situation like the Broncos were in this year, where it looked like you were pretty much didn't anything.
No, I agree. I honestly look at this now because we haven't really started looking towards for a lot of these teams that are kind of like on the verge of the playoffs. The Falcons are actually going to have a really hard time next year. They have 35 players under contract and only have $5 million of cap space going into the offseason. That's a difficult space to be in, which means like guys like Matt Judon may not even be available to re-sign. So I know you threw the question to me, so it's kind of a cop out, but I'm gonna do it anyway because I'm the producer. What would you do here? This is a rough look.
I'm gonna flip this back to you at the end, but I think you believe in. My point is that I think we believe in Zach Robinson, and I think at this point we believe in that full offense, and I think you're good on the offense. It's all young guys, and so I think the best case scenario is basically to do what the Rams did this year, where the Rams were like, we're gutting our defense. And we know we have a couple of guys that we like. We have, in the Falcons case, it would be AJ Terrell and Jesse Bates, who I think is still under contract. And everyone else is gone. And we are drafting defensive player after defensive player after defensive player. I was shocked that the Rams were able to rebuild their defensive line from scratch in 2 years with, day two guys, sans Jared Verse. Kobe Turner, Byron Young, and Braden Fisk are all like kind of transfer guys, weird draft prospects that they kind of reached on and have been excellent for them. And I think that has to be the approach here. I think that anyone that does not fit into a gutting of the defense, which needs to be done anyway. This defense has not been good all year, and they were a liability in this game again. The Commanders were able to take over the game in the second half. And so I think that's the plan. I think the plan is to draft heavily in the second day 2, day 3 defensive guys, probably mainly focusing on those premium positions of the edge and defensive tackle positions, and hoping that you can have a Rams-esque turnaround on the defensive side of the ball where you can be an average to below average defense, but generate a ton of pressure and increase the variance in any given game just by the amount of pressure that you can do. So, as I said, I'm going to flip it back to you. Do you agree, now that you've seen 2 games, of what the Zach Robinson offense can really look like? Or really, in my opinion, we've seen 3 games of what Zach wants this offense to look like. It was the first game with Kirk Cousins, where Kirk Cousins could not get anything done. They switched to the more muted under center, not a ton of play action, not a ton of Kirk putting his back to the defense. And then now we've switched back, now that we have Penix, where a lot more pistol, a lot more boots and play action and wide runs for Bijan, and a lot more shots down the field. We saw that A-dot go way up this week. Are you a true believer in that? And do you think that the success that they were able to catch, kind of later in this game and early in this game, is something that we will see carry forward?
So listen, I'll say I'm biased, right? Because I know Zach. I work with Zach at PFF, so I know how smart he is, and I know what kind of coach he is. So I hands down believe in what Zach's doing in Atlanta. And I think that what we've seen enough now in these last 2 games to know that it's working. For the question for me, and just kind of looking at this team, the 2 biggest questions for me are going to be Grady Jarrett and Caleb McGarry, right? I know obviously the idea is gut the defense, but if you have such limited cap space, does a premier right tackle not make the list, right? If Grady Jarrett, because Grady Jarrett and Caleb McGarry net you back $30 million just the 2 of them alone. So I do wonder how that looks. But in terms of where the offense is going, I have no questions about that. Zach is a very smart, very, very smart football mind. I think this is going to be really good. It sucked they didn't win today. I was really pulling for them. Although I also met Dan Quinn. He's like the man. And I'm very happy for them. I was really kind of pulling for my boy Zach there.
Yeah. So speaking of recreating an offense, as we don't think that the Falcons will be recreating an offense, we're almost certain that our New York Giants will be recreating the offense. Today, they get a victory. And Stopsky, do you think they should have gotten a victory today? Let's just answer the question straight out.
Absolutely. I am not a believer in tanking. Not a believer in tanking at all. Usually teams that finish in the top 3 naturally are teams that just are continually bad anyway. It really from what I've seen, and so I made this 10-year long bet with a buddy of mine, where I said it was a bet where he was very pro tanking, I was very anti tanking. It said, all right, you get any team that drafted a quarterback top 3 naturally, and I get every other team, and we'll get 2 points if that team wins with the Super Bowl, and 1 point if they make it. And I swept him. There's still 2 seasons left on this bet, and I've already swept him because it's just tanking doesn't work, right? If your team is so bad that you finish in the top 3 naturally, there's way more problems than just the quarterback,
right?
You have to rebuild everything from the ground up, and we've seen players that get drafted very high put into those positions, and they fall below their projected ceiling because they have to make up for so many problems. You look at guys like Trevor Lawrence, you look at guys like Joe Burrow. Obviously, Joe's great, right? But how many injuries is Joe Burrow going to have? Especially early on to his career, we saw Andrew Luck with the same thing. These guys that get drafted that high naturally get put into a really rough spot. And it takes a really special player to kind of lift a team out of that. And I think that although it doesn't seem like a massive difference between the 5th and the 1st pick, there is. Like a team that's picking fifth, like the Chargers picked fifth, right?
Right.
They could turn around. The teams that pick in 1, 2, like obviously you have Jaden Daniels, who is one of those very special players to turn a team around. We look at Chicago. Chicago did not. I'm not a pro tanking person. The Giants have a lot of holes to fill. And this is not the quarterback draft that you want to be picking high in, right? Like this, I do think that the quarterback draft is a little over exaggerated in terms of like, oh, this is a terrible QB draft. It's not a terrible QB draft. It's just more middle heavy than it is top heavy, right? I think there's a ton of like really good future backup quarterbacks in this draft, just not a ton of good starting quarterbacks in this draft. And I would rather pick the best player available and try to sign a Brock Purdy, try to trade for Brock Purdy, try to trade for Anthony Richardson, which I think may be available come the offseason. Because that's something that we discussed, me and some of the Giants faithful was, would you trade, if you had the opportunity, would you trade a second round pick for Anthony Richardson to pair him with Brian Dable? Because I would. Like, I think that would be a really good pick. Like, and I would rather have Richardson than Shedeur Sanders right now, or Jalen Milroe, who I think is just a worse Anthony Richardson. And then you could still take the tackle from Texas or tackle from LSU, or if Travis Hunter, if he falls to 4, which I don't think he will, or the Penn State edge rusher, or the Michigan D tackle. Like, there's a lot of like really good like core pieces there that you can really build your team around. And putting a quarterback, especially one like Shedeur Sanders, who's not overly mobile. Like he's not a terrible athlete, but he's not a great athlete. We've seen what the Giants offensive line can and cannot do. Right. You want someone athletic back there to be able to make moves, which kind of goes more towards Cam Ward. And I do like Cam Ward, but I think this team is very far away from being a not just a playoff contender, but like a deep playoff contender, which is where the Giants are always aiming to be. That's not the Jets. We're not just trying to make playoffs here.
Yep, that makes sense to me. A couple things that you mentioned that I thought were good. My kind of general thought when people ask me, should people tank? And honestly, from the player perspective, I'd encourage everyone to go look at Foster Moreau's post-game presser down in New Orleans, because he did a good job of outlining how the players approach this. But if you are, quote, tanking, you're tanking in April. Like, you're not tanking in October and November. That's just the way these things have to go. People have jobs. People need film out there. If you're a special teamer or a guy who's filling in for someone who's injured, like people have families to feed. You're not tanking in November and December. It's not like the NBA where you can pull guys out because their contracts are guaranteed, and even if you trade them or the coach gets fired, they're getting paid. That's not the way the NFL works. So if you're tanking in April. I think a good sign of, or a good example of this, for better or worse, and we've sung their praises at times this year, is the Carolina Panthers. Carolina Panthers let Frankie Louvu go, let Jeremy Chin go, let Brian Burns go. It was clear what they wanted to do: trade for Deontay Johnson, then get rid of Deontay Johnson during the middle of the year. In April, they said, we're going to give our young guys a chance. We're going to lock in Brown at the defensive tackle position, and we're going to set up an offense that we think can be a little successful, given Chuba Hubbard's play, who they clearly believed in, given the interior offensive line, which they know they can kind of refill on a year-to-year basis in free agency, and given some of the young wide receiver positions. It worked out. Now they can restructure with the plethora of new draft resources that they have coming up in this season, focus in on the spots where they needed help, and kind of adjust as they were tanking in April. They were not tanking in November as a team. Like, unfortunately, it seems like the Saints are kind of in that position now that Derek Carr is injured. You also mentioned the draft curve, which goes back to the Panthers and goes back to tanking in April versus tanking in November. If you're not getting the first or second pick, I did a ton of research for this, for the draft dashboard last year for Sumer Sports. And I mean, no matter how you fry it, no matter how you look at it, if you're trying to get an all-pro player, a player like Jaden Daniels, as you mentioned, it's picks 1 or 2. I mean,
Mhm.
if we're playing the probability rolling the dice, playing blackjack here, it's picks 1 or 2. And so again, you have to like prepare to get to that level if that's truly what you're trying to shoot for. But I do have a question for you,
Yeah.
because given the way that the draft curve, as I was talking about, interplays with the rookie payment curve,
Mhm.
it follows that the quarterback position, no matter where you are in the first round, is probably the most profitable to draft. That being said, you go with your big board and you assign, values and rounds to where you would want to say. So I want to give you kind of like short answer here. If you have Cam Ward as a first round level prospect and Shador below him, are you comfortable, if you're the Giants, picks 3 or 4, if Cam Ward falls to you, taking him there?
Yeah, I think it. I think it really matters like who else is on the board. Like if you feel like you have like there's a truly elite player at a premium position on the board still. No receiver, edge, D line, one of the two tackle spots, corner, especially corner. If you feel like you have a premium position available, like a player at that position available, and Cam Ward's there, and you think Cam maybe isn't at that tier, I probably would still. I would think about it. I would really think about it, because although I understand the value, great value doesn't lead to wins.
It's a great point.
So
Great point.
it's something like great value is something we talk about in April and May. Like, oh, look at the value this guy added, but like that doesn't matter. Like once the cleats are laced up and you on the field, like if you're 3-14, you can't turn to the owner and be like, we got great value though. It's like no one cares. Like you lost games. Like no one cares how good it was. And when you look back at like redrafts of previous drafts, you always see players like, man, how did this all pro receiver drop to 20? How did this all pro DN drop to 12? It's because a bunch of quarterbacks that had no reason to be in the top 10 went in the top 10 because value. And it always ends up being a mistake. Like just if you don't feel a guy is great, or if you feel your team is really far away from that, it just don't do it. Like grab the all pro player at a premium spot. I'm not saying don't take a running back, obviously. Like that doesn't help it at all. Because that's a negative value. Or same thing with tight end, right? It's a negative value because the tight ends, their pay scale, if you pick a tight end in the top 5, essentially you're already putting him in the top 5 as pay scale. So the running backs. But any kind of lineman, defensive lineman, edge, corner, receiver, and you think like they're true difference makers, I think that's huge. And right now with quarterback, there are enough free agent and available quarterbacks that can play a season and get you to respectable, that I am okay with it for now. Because the Giants, again, the Giants are trying to get to respectable right now, right? They're a 3-win team. It's not like we're talking about an 8-win team here. They're trying to get to 10 or 12 or 13.
Yep.
This is a 3-win team. And also, I want to point out, like the Giants had the second hardest strength of schedule this year, which we not making excuses for the team, because listen, you are what your record said you are, but they had the second hardest schedule. Their offensive line, which was good, get tanks when Andrew Thomas goes down, which I think is a huge problem because it's a weak link system, kind of like the defense.
Exactly.
And they did all that with Daniel Jones, who's a pretty average to above average quarterback, right? I think some things bounce differently. We're not looking at the Giants this way. And I just don't know if it's worth like reaching on a quarterback, because that's what you did with Daniel Jones. You reached on a quarterback that had no business being at 6. And there's one thing that was always said at PFF, which I do believe in. Players don't bust, teams bust. Yep. Right? Like if you pick a guy that doesn't deserve to be there and he doesn't end up, like that was something that was driving us with Daniel Jones. It was a criticism like, oh, he's being paid $40 million. Like doesn't because you paid him $40 million doesn't turn him into Dak Prescott. right? He's still Daniel Jones. He just is a richer Daniel Jones. So that's a very long-winded answer to your question. But I would say no, if Cam Ward is there at pick 4 and I feel there's another elite player still on the board, I'm taking the elite player.
I think recency bias is going to be really interesting to see how it interplays in the discourse and whether that discourse at the consensus level impacts the draft. Who knows? Because we are coming out of a draft where people took shots on quarterbacks early. Now, those teams were uniquely set up to win in the case of the Falcons and in the case of the Broncos, where the Broncos had a defense that was excellent last year and brought the entire defense back and were once again excellent this year, and also had some pretty good wideouts and a very good offensive line. Garrett Bowles, I think, is one of the best left tackles in the league. He was fantastic against Trey Hendrickson all game on yesterday. And so, like, that's a unique situation where a quarterback can succeed. Same thing with the Falcons, right? You have a Chris Lindstrom, you have an offensive line that you trust, you have a ton of skill players that are excellent. That's an interesting place to put a quarterback. But then on the flip side, at the bridge quarterback method that you seem to be a little bit more keen on, you have Sam Darnold, who played excellently today against a Green Bay team that has been slaughtering teams. In particular, their defense has looked really good, and he was making throw after throw after throw after throw. And so it's going to be interesting to see which way the scales tilt, because this isn't the quarterback draft that it was last year. Certainly, by all metrics, measures, and consensus opinions thus far, that will be the case. But not
just Sammy, right? Like they're talking about, the bridge quarterback method. Geno Smith, Jared Goff.
That's a good point.
Like there are a bunch of guys that we're seeing Baker, exactly. Like Russell Wilson or Justin Fields. Obviously, Pittsburgh's going to make it in. There are plenty of guys there where you've seen now, like, don't reach, like, build a team around players. Like in my opinion, quarterback is the only position where being like a good starter is not good enough to keep your job, because everyone, in order to win, right? In order to win consistently in the NFL, you need like a we call blue or gold tier guys, like all pro to Pro Bowl type impact players, right? So there are just plenty of like good quarterbacks that just were not at that level circulating around the NFL, who end up being like long-term career backups, that if you put pieces around and coaching around, you can be successful. Now, the chance of you winning a Super Bowl is like super thin with that, but just you can be successful. And then if you have that quarterback, then you can draft a quarterback behind them. And you can develop them, like you saw with a Lamar Jackson and a Jalen Hurts and a Patrick Mahomes and a Michael Penix. So I think I don't think you need to wait like the Jordan Love, like 3 years. But I think a rookie going into the season knowing like I don't have to start day one is a big weight off their shoulders. And by the time they're into mid-season, they're ready to go.
Right. To close this out, Stopsky, we're going to do a quick little exercise, because I'm interested in your thoughts, having looked so closely at the Giants, and given that both the Jets and the Giants will be drafting highly in this draft, I think there's going to be a lot more discussion, and this is going to be a good podcast to look back on. I'm going to just go through some of the players, and you tell me if you think that's a building block guy, and then I have a punchline coming at the end.
Oh, so great.
Malik Neighbors, wide receiver. I think that's a guy that we
that's a pillar player. Yeah, he's a pillar player. Great.
What are your thoughts on Tyrone Tracy?
He's a running back. Like he's a really good, solid running back. I think I think the impact Tracy's having right now is being overshadowed by Saquon Barkley having just like a historically good year. And if he was having a regular Saquon Barkley, like 1,000 yards, 1,100 yards, if you look at Tyrone Tracy, be like, oh, you know what? This ended up being okay. But I think Tracy's great. I think Tracy is a lead back in this league. And he'll be a lead back for the Giants the next 3 years, probably.
Certainly. And then Andrew Thomas, the injuries are a question mark, I'd put him as what would you put him as?
I would put him as worrying to me. I think you can't build your offensive line on Andrew Thomas right now because we have 2 seasons back to back where he got hurt early. And even when he was back early this season, he did not look like the Andrew Thomas, the all-pro Andrew Thomas that we saw. Which, he's still a top, top 15, 20 tackle in the league without a doubt, right? Maybe even top 10. But like we can't go in, or the Giants can't go in with Jermaine Illuminor as like option B. Like there needs to be another, like, all right, like this dude is legit. Much as I love Jermaine Illuminor, like he's played really well at right tackle and even at left tackle at times, but like that can't be the second best guy on the line. Like there needs to be someone else there that is a anchor, whether it's a guard or center or right tackle. Like someone else needs to be there where you can hang your hat and be like, all right, if Andrew Thomas goes down, we're not totally screwed.
Makes sense. And then keeping in the background the way that the Panthers in particular built this year through free agency at the interior line positions, there's one option that we have not discussed yet for the Giants, and that would be a trade for J.J. McCarthy. What are your thoughts on that potential avenue for the Giants?
No, hard pass. So there's 2 reasons why hard pass. Now, the first one is I don't love McCarthy. I thought McCarthy, I had this conversation with Matt Collar, and I always said, like, why do I want McCarthy? I already have McCarthy. His name is Daniel Jones. Like I'm good. I don't need a second Daniel Jones on my roster. I think McCarthy would be lucky to play play Daniel Jones. Considering he was not asked to do much in Michigan, like at all. And not only did he not play this year, he was injured all year, which means he got 0 reps, no mental reps, no nothing. So he's 2 years behind the 8 ball now. I'm not putting a guy who's just had 2 surgeries behind this offensive line. And also we've seen if it is Brian Daboll comes back, which I kind of hope it is. I like Brian Daboll a lot. Putting a statue at quarterback with Brian Daboll is not the way to go. You need someone more in the line of like Richardson.
I wouldn't call him a statue. I mean, my general comp for him was like what we would have expected a plus Desmond Ridder to be if he were on Michigan and won all the time and was like an IMG guy. So kind of similar to your Daniel Jones.
I'm not saying he's a bad athlete, but he's not a superstar. He's like an average athlete for quarterback this time, and he's coming off massive surgeries. So like let's lower that back down a bit.
That's a good point.
Like yeah, I want nothing to do with McCarthy. No, sorry.
Just wanted to throw it out there because it's a little spicy. But Stopsky, I appreciate you hopping on late night. We did a lot of great discussions, and man, I'm excited now that we're coming to the close of the season to have some great playoff discussions and some great draft discussions because this is the real season, Stopsky.
Oh, I know. And before we wrap, no, you were talking about my team. I need to ask about your team a little bit. The same. We'll wrap up this. Who do you want taking snaps at quarterback for the Saints next year?
I mean, I guess at this point, Derek Carr. I don't know where we go other than that. I don't think Spencer Rattler is the answer. I can tell you that. And Jake Haener ain't taking it. I don't even think Jake Haener is going to be on this team next year.
Jake Haener's going to play quarterback in a Hollywood movie somewhere.
Yeah,
he's going to be
probably so. He will be in Remember the Titans 2, the sequel. Remembering the Titans again. The live action sequel to the live action Remember the Titans. That Jake Haener will be Sunshine, starring Jake Haener as Sunshine. The problem is like the cupboard is not deep, and
yeah, they have a lot.
It's interesting analyzing why it's not deep because you look at teams like the Falcons, who's playing Caden Ellis at inside linebacker. He was the Sam backer for us, which was more of a package guy. And it was because DeMario Davis was playing at an all-pro level up until last year, and you look at guys like Trey Hendrickson and why they're not on the team anymore. And it was because Cam Jordan was playing at a Pro Bowl level until 2 years ago. And the way that we approached it, because we had a generational quarterback, was let's re-up. And the hope was that injuries would never come for us, because they didn't for several years. And Michael Thomas is no longer in the league. Marshawn Lattimore has played one game basically for the majority of the season, the meat of the season. He played 1 or 2 games and did not look great against A.J. Brown. And Tyrann Mathieu getting up there in age. We're playing Clyde Edwards-Helaire at running back. We're elevating him to the active squad at this point because Kamara's hurts. And so it's going to have to be some dark times. But I trust that the same creative minds that were able to do innovative things at the time with the cap in order to ensure that Michael Thomas could be on the team and Ted Ginn could be on the team and Alvin Kamara and all these guys could stay on the team and be all pro level guys. I mean, at one point when we went back and looked at it, there was a period of time where you can make a Pro Bowl argument for every single starter on the team.
Yeah.
In the late 2000s, which I think the only team you could probably do that with this year would be the
Jets.
Lions.
Yes.
And the Lions are injured. So you can't really do that at this point anymore. And I think that maybe there's been 6 teams total in the past that you could really do that. I guess you could kind of make that argument this year for the Vikings as well. Sans probably Sam Darnold, which is ironic because he's playing very well. So,
listen, he made our Pro Bowl team.
That is unfortunately for me true, because I did not vote for him.
He's going to end up making the actual Pro Bowl team probably as well. So
he probably will. Yeah,
prepare for that.
Yeah, the NFC's a rough play of it, but it again, tanks are done in April, and so I think April will be the time when we see how this really goes. And I think that step 1, if they want to maintain any competitive balance, has to be the wide receiver position. We can't trot out Yale undrafted free agents that literally, Dane Brugler had very little on, when Dane Brugler is the smartest guy in the draft community, does the hardest research, has the most detailed research. And when Dane Brugler's like, yeah, he ran a couple routes at Yale, and that guy is your starting wide receiver, it starts to get a little spooky.
Dane Brugler's got 800 words on 1,000 guys. Every draft, it's like, all right, this
Tipton
dude
is not one of those fellas.
He played ball, I think. No, I get you. And listen, Mickey Loomis is a great GM. So I'm sure I have all the faith that he'll fix it. And yeah, it's just it was rough for them. And I agree. I think Derek Carr gets a lot of hate. Probably a lot of unjust hate. So I think he's fine as your quarterback. But I'm surprised you don't like Jake Haener. That's unfortunate.
Well, look, to close it out on a hopeful note, the Thunder had Sam Presti and Rob Hennigan and all these guys that everyone thought was the smartest folks in the league. And for years, they did the same exact thing, and they made mistakes, just as the Saints did. The Saints let Trey Hendrickson go. He's an all-pro. The Saints let Zach Bond go, another guy who is now an inside backer that was basically stuck behind Demario Davis. So they played him at Sam backer and let him rush a little bit, and it didn't fit properly in the 4-3 system that Dennis Allen liked to run, and blah, 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 blah. Ends up on the Eagles, ends up in all-pro, very similar to, way in excess of Caden Ellis, I'll say. You make those mistakes, but you keep the core pieces. You compete and compete and compete, and you make it to the championship games, and never doesn't turn out your way. And that's the way that history will look at it. And they struck it down to the ribs, and now they have the best team in the NBA. I'm hoping that is going to be the case for Mickey Loomis and Jeff Ireland and Kai Harley, who I think have a similar mentality as that. And they stretched every bound to try to make it work. And now you try to make it work a different way. And that's all you can ask for, Stopsky, as a Saints fan nowadays.
Listen, man, I like you bringing new hope to a new year. This is great stuff. And yeah, I really this might be a little sacrilegious to say, but my favorite point of the year is the off season, is the business season. It's free agency. It's the draft. I'm really excited to get into it because it's new hope. It's right. It's the only time when all 32 fan bases are like, this is our year. This is it. and then it all dies in September. So
no, it does not die. In the Shawshank Redemption, Stopsky, Andy says, hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things, and no good thing can ever die. And so that's why we report on the NFL, because come April, baby, the Giants are going to be in the Super Bowl. The Saints are going to be playing them in the NFC Championship game. And who knows who's going to be on the other AFC side. Am I wrong?
No, I think you're right. I'm all for the 2025 NFC Championship game between the Saints and the Giants. We'll have to expense it out to Sumer for us to go.
It'll be a great time. So, folks, as Stopsky said, it's the new year. And with the new year comes some great college games. So we're going to be coming to you this week on the SumerDaily feed with some new college stuff. Stopsky, thank you for joining me. He's Matthew Stopsky, super producer. I'm Sam Brookhouse from Sumer Sports signing off. Thanks, everyone, for listening.